As a hospital chaplain, I deal with grief and loss daily. Some people say, "How can you be with people who are hurting so much? Isn't it overwhelming?" And I'd be lying if I said it wasn't. Sometimes the silent sobs in my heart well up from such a deep place that there simply are no words. All I can do is stay with them, silently praying for them and for God to give me the strength to walk with them through their pain. It helps that I've experienced such devastating loss myself. God provided support to me through others in my dark times of grief and loss, so I attempt to be there for them. It also helps that I know, no matter what the present holds for me or for them, God is there, and things won't remain so dire forever. My faith and hope in God can provide a respite for them in the midst of their grief. The title of the book of Lamentations can be translated as "How." It begins, "How lonely sits the city that once was full of people. How like a widow she has become. She that was great among the nations, she that was a princess among the provinces has become a vassal." The opening verse of Lamentations. And it continues on in that same vein for another 2.5 chapters, until in the middle of chapter 3, where some of the most hopeful and beautiful words of the Bible are written. After our Lamentations passage today, Lamentation reverts back to the pain and hopelessness of devastating loss. Lamentations was written during the time of the destruction of Jerusalem, when the Israelites were exiled in Babylon for 70 years. It evokes such raw grief that not only the loss of what was, but the loss of future hope as well. I often encounter an example of this when a child's life ends through miscarriage, stillbirth, or infancy or early childhood. The hopes and dreams of the parents and grandparents for the child are never going to come to fruition, and it complicates their loss a lot. Like the writer of the book of Lamentations, they ask, "How? How can this be? Everything was all right. Now it isn't, and never will be the same again. How did this happen? What did I do to cause this? How can God do this to me, to us, to our child?" That word "how" carries with it the mournfulness and stabbing pain of grief. Again, there are no words that will help. Nothing can ease the pain. All we can do is walk with them through it. Our gospel lesson today starts at that deep, dark, and seemingly hopeless place of how. After Jesus has calmed the sea by simply speaking, he and his disciples get back in the boat and go to the other side, where they are met with a large crowd waiting for them. The disciples have just witnessed a miracle, and they are still processing its meaning when they are hit with the aching grief of a father whose daughter is dying. Jairus, the leader of the synagogue, falls at Jesus' feet and begs him to come with him and lay hands on his daughter so that she might be healed and live. His little princess lies wasting away on her deathbed, much as Jerusalem was laid to waste by the Babylonians. Later in the story, we learn that Jairus' daughter is 12 years old, which marked the end of childhood and the beginning of womanhood in Jewish society. If Jairus' daughter were to die, he would not only lose his child, but also his dreams for her as she becomes an adult. Dreams of marriage and of the joining of two families together, dreams of motherhood, and future grandchildren for Jairus. So out of his compassion, Jesus went with Jairus, and the disciples and the crowd followed. What drove Jairus to seek out Jesus? Was it the talk around the town that Jesus did such miraculous things that he had to be from God? Was it a last-ditch effort to save his daughter, despite the fact that as a synagogue leader, Jairus probably should not have been seen with the itinerant preacher who had the scribes and Pharisees plotting against him already? Was it his faith in God that made him believe Jesus could stop death? Perhaps the words from Lamentation 3 rang in his heart, and he clung to the hope that God would provide healing for his daughter. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. For the Lord will not reject forever. Although he causes grief, he will have compassion according to his steadfast love. For he does not willingly afflict or grieve anyone. As a chaplain, every day I hear people say that they think their illness is a test from God or punishment for something they've done. My soul aches when I hear such things. Would a loving God do something like that? I don't believe God would. The God I've come to know and understand always operates out of love and does not willingly afflict or grieve anyone, as Lamentation states. Now, Mark has a way in his gospel of interrupting things. On the way to Jairus' house, a woman who's been bleeding for 12 years, who is without hope that it will ever get any better because she spent everything she ever had on doctors and nothing has helped, has such faith in God that she believes if she can just inch her way through the crowd and touch the hem of Jesus' garment, she will be healed. What you may not know is that when women had their periods in Old and New Testament times, they were considered ritually unclean under Jewish law. They had to stay away from everybody else until the bleeding stopped, and then they were required to take a ritual bath, which made them clean again according to the law. Only then could they resume their lives. So this poor, nameless woman had been considered unclean for 12 years and was an outcast. She was taking a chance just being in the crowd that day, because anyone she touched would be made unclean according to the law. In a colossal reversal, the woman touched Jesus' cloak, and instead of rendering Jesus unclean, the woman was not only healed of her disease, but was instantly considered clean and restored to her former place within her family and society. Jesus not only brought physical healing that she longed for, but also healed her spiritually and socially. She had lost her life as she knew it 12 years before when the bleeding started, which was about the same time that Jairus' daughter was born. Jesus gave the woman back her life when he healed her. As we're about to see, Jesus will do the same thing for Jairus' daughter. Mark links the two unnamed females together through Jesus. The woman touched Jesus' cloak and immediately felt in her body that she was healed. Jesus, being crushed all around by the crowd, spins around and says, "Who touched me?" And the disciples think he must be crazy, since the crowd was pressing in close. Imagine the courage it took for that woman to be able to speak up and say that she's the one that had touched Jesus. She came to Jesus with fear and trembling and fell down before him, just as Jairus did when he had sought Jesus out. Although the woman was already healed, and could have rushed away, she stayed and told Jesus the whole truth. And Jesus said, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." This woman, without a name, who was shunned as unclean because of her bleeding, is now called daughter by the Son of God. She's no longer an outcast, but is remembered within her community. Lamentations 3 says, "The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul that seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord." As Jesus is talking with her, others rush up to him and interrupt, just as she had interrupted the scene earlier, saying to Jairus, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" Imagine how deflated Jairus must have been as all hope seeped away with those words. But then Jesus speaks, and hope is restored again. He calmed Jairus' soul like he calmed the sea the evening before. "Do not fear, only believe," Jesus says. He doesn't let the crowd follow him, but takes Jairus, Peter, James, and John and goes to Jairus' house where the time of mourning has already begun. And the women are keening and weeping and wailing loudly. And Jesus says, "Why do you make such a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." "Really, Jesus? We have seen her lifeless body. What do you know?" Ha! But the joke is on them. Jesus sends them out and only allows Jairus and his wife, Peter, James, and John, to go up to her room with him. Jesus takes Jairus' daughter by the hand and says, "Little girl, get up." And immediately she got up off the bed and started walking around. Of course, everyone was amazed, and Jesus told them in the strictest way not to tell anyone and to get the girl something to eat, because after all, she hadn't eaten and must really have been hungry. Jesus not only brought physical healing to Jairus' daughter, but he reunited her with her family so that her family was complete once again. And he also restored Jairus' hopes for his daughter's future. Do you think you could keep quiet about something like that? Some people believe that healing stopped in biblical times, but that would be akin to saying God stopped being God after Jesus came. God's love is the instrument of all healing. Knowing and accepting God's love in its fullest is the ultimate healing. Perfect love casts out all fear, we are told in the first epistle of John. That includes fear of death and dying. In most of the healing stories of Jesus in the New Testament, people ask for healing from specific ailments, but Jesus always gives them so much more. He gives lepers who have been ostracized for years a place back in their community, as well as healing their sores. He restores sight for those who cannot see, either literally or figuratively. He brings peace to those who are troubled in their mind. In all cases, it isn't just physical healing that occurs. People are made whole. Sins are forgiven. Outsiders are restored into the community. Healing comes through us as well as through Jesus. You and I are to be God's instruments of healing for the world when we show it God's love. As a chaplain, I often hear people pray for a miraculous cure for their loved ones who are dying, even when the disease process is so far along that it would be cruel in some ways to keep them from dying, because death means an end to their suffering. It is the one praying for that miraculous cure that really needs the healing. They need to trust that God is loving and merciful and knows what's best for their loved one. They need to have their fear of being alone by their loved one's death healed, by knowing that God will provide for them, comfort them, and help them through that difficult time. There may be no cure for their loved one, but there is healing as they go to heaven, and healing for the person looking for the miracle as they slowly come to accept that God is calling their loved one home. That is the miracle, acceptance, which leads eventually to the healing of their grief. In Lamentations, in the midst of the lament and grief of the survivors of the exile in Babylon, there is an island of hope found in the middle of chapter 3. These are some of the most beautiful and comforting words in the Old Testament, and they are a source of hope and peace in times of great loss for us as well. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. So great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore, I will hope in him. Amen.